You're watching City Channel 4, your window to our community.
I'm Downing Thomas, Associate Provost and Dean of International Programs, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to the keynote and kickoff of the Provost's Global Forum, which is a new annual event redesigned to serve as the premier event on campus expressly focused on global issues. The forum topic is intended to bring together experts from the faculty and leading voices from the country and around the world from a variety of areas of business, technology, education, politics, civil society, to raise awareness about and contribute to debate on the foremost issues in globalization that face us today. In addition to serving the University of Iowa community broadly, the forum endeavors to build connections between the university and the state of Iowa and positions the UI as a national node in discussions of global affairs. The forum is made possible through the generous support of the Stanley UI Foundation Support Organization, and in fact, Dick and Mary Jo Stanley are with us this evening, and I hope you'll join me in thanking them for their support. I also want to recognize Greg Hammett and, above all, Amy Weissman from the UI Center for Human Rights, both of whom have put in many hours to make this year's Provost Forum possible, and they've done a fantastic job in bringing together a spectacular roster of people, both from around the country and in our local communities here in Iowa, the folks who work on a daily basis with refugees. I want to point out that questions will be held until the end and will be delivered through note cards. So if you have a question during Ambassador Quinn's presentation, please just gesture to the side and someone will bring you a note card. We'll collect those at the end and have questions through that mechanism. So to introduce our keynote speaker, I'd like to turn it over to Provost Barry Butler, who's been a strong advocate for the university's deliberate expansion in international research, teaching, and engagement activities. Barry?
Thank you, Downing. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to this great event. And if those of you that were here earlier, the readings and the entertainment we had prior to this were just outstanding. So I want to congratulate those of you in the audience that participated in that. It was really both moving in some of the readings as well as entertaining in some of the dance routines. So I congratulate them as well. This forum really is an opportunity to bring together a broad range of individuals to focus on an important global issue. I'm very proud of that, but I also want to remind this audience that international engagement isn't something that we do at the University of Iowa just on a single day of the year, nor is it an extra that we add onto the curriculum. Internationalization is critical to the university's academic mission. We've recognized that in our strategic plan, where inclusion and internationalization is one of the three foundational commitments we've made, one of the cross-cutting areas where we recognize we must be effective in order to achieve the highest levels of excellence in everything that we do here at the university. For example, we know that international engagement contributes to student success, which is one of the priority focus areas identified in the strategic plan. From a public opinion survey conducted by NAFSA, the Association of International Educators, we know that a majority of Americans recognize that international education is key to making graduates of the future competitive and setting them up to thrive in the global workplace. And I can't help but notice all the students that arrived and are in the audience tonight, and I hope you remember that as you move on in your careers, whether you're moving on to college or graduate school. Similarly, as research becomes more and more collaborative and multidisciplinary, opportunities for faculty and students to engage with fellow researchers abroad are becoming even more important, and we see that all the time at the university. Also, we know that Iowa's economic health and well-being of Iowans will increasingly depend on success in the global marketplace. In short, the university must be a global institution in order to fulfill its core missions of teaching, research, and public service in Iowa. In the fall of 2012, the University of Iowa welcomed more international students than ever before, more than 3,500 students representing 105 countries. That's more than 12% of the student body here on campus, all bringing unique cultural backgrounds and experiences that enrich our campus and add immeasurably to the vitality of the university community. That's one way we're bringing the world to Iowa. We're also bringing Iowa to the world. More than 1,300 University of Iowa students studied abroad in this last academic year alone. And we're working to make those experiences even more valuable for students by offering expanded opportunities to work, do an internship, and volunteer abroad. I was in India just a few weeks ago, and one of the sites that we visited mentioned that just 2 weeks before me being there, there were 100 and some University of Iowa students on visiting and doing some work over the winter break, as we call it. So it continues to grow. Faculty exchanges, research collaborations, and institutional linkages are creating new opportunities every day for exciting international exchange. Our campus and our community are becoming more and more globally aware, and we all benefit from it. Of course, Iowa City isn't an oasis of international activity in a desert of isolation. The state of Iowa has for many years and in many ways benefited from the connections that bind us to the world. Those ties are largely business and agricultural exchanges, trade, and economic development. There are also long-standing ties to various parts of the world that come through the movement of people. People like the refugees who have been made the Midwest home to some of the largest refugees communities in this country. And that brings me to a very special honor I have this evening, the opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker, Ambassador Kenneth Quinn. I'd like to point out that although Ambassador Quinn wasn't born in Iowa, he did move here early enough to graduate from Wahlert High School and then on to Loras College and Marquette and then eventually University of Maryland. Dr. Quinn served for more than 30 years in the Foreign Service, ending with his service from 1996 to 1999 as ambassador to Cambodia. His first assignment was a rural development advisor in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. He became head of a military advisory team and took part in the team's combat operations, repeatedly coming under fire. In January of 2009, he was honored for his service and courage with the Air Medal for Combat Service, the first civilian ever to receive that award. Dr. Quinn's distinguished diplomatic career went on to include posts as a member of the Secretary of State Henry Kissinger's National Security Staff, chair of the U.S. Interagency Task Force on Prisoners of War and Missing in Action, narcotics counselor and refugee coordinator at the U.S. Mission to the United Nations in Vienna, Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in the Philippines, and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, among many other assignments. In 1978, a special exchange program with the Foreign Service allowed him to return to Iowa to join the staff of Governor Robert Ray, who was working to make Iowa a welcoming home for thousands of refugees from Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Thailand. Dr. Quinn played a key role in leading the government's pioneering program to resettle those refugees in Iowa. He's also served as an executive director of the Iowa Shares program, which sent Iowa medical personnel, supplies, and food to Cambodia during a period of mass starvation. He's one of the most decorated foreign service officers of his generation, and among those many awards, he's won the Presidential Distinguished Service Award. Following his retirement from the State Department in 2000, Ambassador Quinn became president of the World Food Prize Foundation, a Des Moines-based organization dedicated to fighting hunger around the world. And I think everybody in this audience is very familiar with it. It was the vision of Dr. Norman Borlaug, winner of the 1970 Nobel Peace Prize for his work in world agriculture, and, as you may know, an Iowan, whose legacy Ambassador Quinn is proudly carrying on to this day, and I might say in a very successful way. In his remarks on the occasion of Ambassador Quinn receiving the Air Medal for Combat Service, Iowa Senator Tom Harkin said as follows, quote, "Ambassador Quinn has served our nation as a diplomat, a warrior, and a passionate humanitarian. At every stage of his brilliant career in public service, he has embodied America's highest ideals, and he has earned renown for his courage, initiative, and intellectual independence." We're very honored to have Ambassador Quinn with us here tonight. Please join me in welcoming him to the podium. Ambassador?
Thank you. Well, so, Provost Butler, thank you for that very, very generous introduction. It's a thrill to be here, and please convey my warmest greetings to President Sally Mason, wonderful friend of mine, and my wishes, my ardent wishes, for a Hawkeye victory tonight. Yes, right. And that, so, for any visitors who are here, international guests, those who are from outside the state, at exactly 8 p.m., if we're not finished, all the Iowans are going to stand up and walk out. I want you to know it's not a protest against me, at least I don't think so. Or they'll all be looking down at their handheld devices, watching the basketball game, which starts then. So I'm well aware of the pressure that's on that. Associate Provost and my good friend Downing Thomas, thank you so much for being here, and you're Dean of International Programs, and also a professor of French literature. And it's the French language and French study that got me into refugee programs. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. I also have two members of my staff from the World Food Prize here, Bien Lee, who's our Director of Planning, and Crystal Harris, who's my special assistant. And if you're wondering, why have I brought my staff from the World Food Prize here, they're going to kind of vet the cards that you send in. And I've told them any of the really tough questions, just put them aside and don't let them come up. That's not true, I'm just kidding. Dick and Mary Jo Stanley, so wonderful to see you again. I have such very, very high regard for the Stanley Foundation. They bring such focus to the United Nations. I went to Muscatine a few years ago, visited with Dick at the wonderful building, and I'm there in Muscatine's the melon capital of Iowa. And I'm saying, Dick, here you're doing all this terrific international work and having such an impact, but haven't you thought about relocating out of Muscatine to some larger place? And then, of course, I find out that the president of China, Xi Jinping, considers Muscatine his home, his second home outside of China. He was just here a year ago in February, came back, he's talking about the sunset over the Mississippi and Mark Twain. And then the president of the World Bank, Jim Yon Kim, played quarterback on the Muscatine High School football team. I hope you forgive me for my silly remarks a few years ago. It's clear that Muscatine's like the capital of the world. And of course, everyone who's president of the United States has to show up there several times during the Iowa caucuses. So, I'm Larry Young. I just met Larry from the UNHCR. So glad that you're here. I have such incredible regard for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. I've seen them in action all around the world. For anybody who's critical of the United Nations, that means they haven't seen the UNHCR in action, all of the incredible good that they do. I don't know if my friend Linda Hartke is here yet, but I know she's coming on the program, and she worked in Cambodia during the time that I was there. Greg Hammett and Amy Weissman, congratulations to you for the wonderful program you've put together. Thank you for being part of it. I told Amy when I came in and met her, I said, I'm really anxious to meet your husband because he is the soccer coach at Xavier High School in Cedar Rapids. And they were state champions, and of course the biggest rival of my high school, Wahlert High School in Dubuque. And I'm here because the lone senior on the University of Iowa basketball team playing tonight, Eric May, is from Dubuque Wahlert. So we're feeling, really privileged and proud. So the topic of my talk is Iowa's moral heritage and leadership in refugee resettlement. And I want to tell you a little bit about my own journey with refugees. I want to tell you about Iowa's, and then I want to talk about our state's moral heritage and that. And when I was graduating from Loras College, my dream, provost, was to come here. If only I could come to the University of Iowa and go to law school. That was what I wanted to be. And I didn't have enough money to pay for the law boards to even apply and get a score. But you could take the U.S. Foreign Service exam for free. And even though it was an incredible long shot, 18,000 people take the test, maybe 1,000 pass, then you have to do an oral, and they maybe hire 200 to become Foreign Service officers. And people are critical of the federal government and inefficiencies and waste, but I'm thankful because probably somewhere some official mixed up my scores with somebody else. They admitted me, and I got in. And you can imagine a kid from Dubuque. I had these visions of diplomatic sugar plums dancing in my head. I was going to be in the chandeliered ballrooms. I'd be sipping the aperitifs. I'd be chatting about the nuances of international relations, because that's what I thought diplomats did. And I wanted to go to Paris because I'm from Dubuque, named after Julian Dubuque, the first European, the French fur trapper who set foot on Iowa. I went to Loras College, founded by Father Matthias Loras, the French missionary priest who came. And I took 2 years of French in college, Dean. It was a requirement. So I thought, I'm a shoo-in. So I went to the personnel people at the State Department, and I said, I want to go to Paris. No need to discuss anything else. And they listened to me and kind of, smiled. And they said, well, okay, you go and take the French test. So in the State Department, we have a system, I'm sure you're familiar with it, where you get graded on how well you can speak a foreign language. And you get a score from 1, which is, you could do it a little bit, to 5, you're a native speaker, and I'm sure you're a 5, Dean Thomas. So I go in, and I'm sitting there with these very nice French ladies, and they're asking me questions, and I think I'm responding. And then they sent me out, and they came back in, and they said, well, let us explain the scoring system. 0 means you don't speak the language, 5, you're a native speaker, and you got a 0+. Then I went back to the people in personnel, and they said, let us explain something to you. You're under 26, you've never been in the military, you're not married, and we have this program in Vietnam, and before I knew what happened, they were training me in Vietnamese, and I'm in the back of a single-engine plane landing on a dirt road in Sadek province in the Mekong Delta in 1968 in the middle of the war. And thank goodness, because it was there that I came face to face with the human suffering of the war victims and refugees that were generated by that conflict and every other conflict in which people and countries engage. And the first job I had was to go to Phum Hoa village and to help people who were returning home. And we went through the village, and there were no structures left standing, just sort of the places where everybody had built their home before. And now we're coming back with some hope of reestablishing their lives, now that it seemed the military situation had settled down. It's the most durable solution that you hope for in refugee work? Can people go back to where they're from? Rebuild their lives. And we were there taking a few basic things, some metal sheets of roofing, some thatch walls to build a basic structure with, a few months' supply of rice to keep them going till they could get their first crop in. And you saw them that they weren't just numbers. Here were families, and you'd look them in the eye, and you'd see the suffering they went through, and you'd talk to them and hear their stories. It's one of the most important things you can do in refugee work is listen to the refugees. Find out what they need, what they want. And as we did that, I also came face to face with the corruption which is possible. And if you ever have the opportunity to give money to support any of the NGOs that are here or working, or the UN organizations, you should do so, because they're the difference between food and help getting to people and not having to go through those who might take it off the top. Because that's what I found. Come out and people say, oh, please, here, just sign these papers, say we've delivered everything. But they hadn't delivered it all. They had taken off part of the rice for themselves, part of the supplies for themselves. Now, the State Department said the deal for me was that if I stuck out my 18 months and did my job, they'd come through for me. So they sent me my assignment, and I was going to go to Harvard. I was going to study labor relations, and I was going to be assigned to Western Europe. They didn't say Paris, because I think they figured I hadn't gotten to Saigon much and I hadn't practiced my French. But they were going to take care of me, and I had my assignment. And then you have one of those moments that can change your life. I'm riding on a boat. I'm taking a journalist from Time Life magazine. His name was Dick Swanson, never forget him, to show him Fumwa village, show him what had happened, how people had come back, how they had started their lives again, how the refugee assistance had been helpful. And we're riding down the Mekong River, and I can describe to you where I was sitting in the boat as he and I talked, and he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to Harvard. I'm going to study labor relations. I'm going to be assigned to Western Europe. I'm going to work in an embassy. And he said, well, why would you want to do that? Here you are. You're in the middle of the epic event of your generation. You speak the language. I was better at Vietnamese than French. And you're able to step through the cultural veil and look at this village. You can make a difference. Why would you want to do that? And I thought, it's like they didn't have pause buttons back then. It was like somebody pushed my pause button. And I just sat there for a second. And I turned to him and I said, I don't know why I'd want to do that. And I went back that night and I wrote to the State Department and I said, I don't want to go to Harvard. I don't want to study labor relations. I don't want to be assigned to Western Europe. I want to stay in Vietnam. Now, if you know anything about international organizations and diplomatic institutions, you know that when there's such clear signs of mental illness and instability, they usually bring you right home. But they were pretty desperate for people to stay in Vietnam, so I got to stay for 6 years. I met my wife there, and I eventually ended up assigned up on the Cambodian border in a place called Chau Duc. And I was standing on top of a mountain in June of 1973, looking out into Cambodia, far as the eye could see, 15 or 20 miles. Every village was on fire. Smoke pouring up out of every village. Never seen anything like that. And the next days, refugees poured across the border. And I went out among them and I brought an interpreter and interviewed them. I listened to the refugees. And they told this story of this organization called the Khmer Rouge. who were implementing this radical new system of government. They had taken everybody and forced them out of their homes. And just like Fumwa village, they burned